Hey everyone! Before we dive in, don't forget to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. And let me know in the comments, what do you think about this story? Let's get into it. The morning was crisp, the kind that made a farmer proud to be up before the sun. My tractor rumbled through the fields as I planted the next season's crops, just like my grandfather had done for 50 years before me. I had no idea that while I was sowing life into the soil, someone else was planning to rip it all away. At lunchtime, I wiped my hands, grabbed my phone, and nearly choked on my sandwich. 10 missed calls from neighbors, 3 voicemails from my cousin, and then the email, notice of violation, cease and desist order. I laughed. A homeowners association? Trying to fine me for farming on my land? My family had owned this 2,000-acre farm for 4 generations, long before the fancy suburban homes of Oak Ridge Estates popped up on the edge of my property. I thought it was a joke, until the next day. That's when Karen Wilson, the HOA president, marched onto my land, flanked by 2 men in polos with HOA logos. "Mr. Jackson," she said, flashing a plastic smile, "we need to discuss your ongoing violations." "Violations?" I crossed my arms. "You've got no jurisdiction over my land." Karen's eyes gleamed with the kind of arrogance that only comes from a person who has never been told no. "Actually," she said, handing me another letter, "our records show that your agricultural exemption expired last year. That means your land is now subject to our community standards." I blinked. My property tax bill hadn't changed. My zoning status hadn't changed. Nothing had changed, except, apparently, in Karen's world. I crumpled the letter and tossed it back at her. "Nice try." The next week, my farm turned into a war zone. Every single day, I received new complaints, noise violations from my tractor, odor complaints from my chicken coops, and threats of $200 daily fines if I didn't stop operations. The sheriff showed up multiple times. "Look, Mike," he said apologetically, "I have to respond to these, but between you and me, something stinks worse than your chicken coop." Then I saw them, men in suits, walking my land, taking pictures, measuring fields. I jumped into my truck and tore across the dirt path, stopping inches from a tall man in an expensive suit. "You lost?" I asked, stepping out. He didn't flinch, just smiled and extended his hand. "James Miller, Westview Development, just surveying the land." "Surveying and why land? For what exactly?" He glanced at his tablet. "Oh, we're set to break ground next month. Oak Ridge Estates sold us 1,700 acres for the new shopping center and luxury condos." My blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I never sold my land." The suit hesitated, then turned the tablet around. "Digital documents. My fields, with a county stamp. According to paperwork, the Oak Ridge HOA's Community Trust finalized the sale 3 weeks ago." I felt my heart slam against my ribs. The HOA sold my land, without my knowledge. I raced home, nearly tearing the door off my safe as I yanked out my property deeds. Everything was in order, my name, my ownership, but I needed answers. I called the county records office. I need to verify my property ownership. The clerk on the other end went silent for too long. Sir, it looks like 1,700 acres were transferred to the Oak Ridge Estates Community Trust 6 weeks ago." My vision blurred. "That's not possible. I never signed anything." The clerk hesitated. "Sir, the documents have your signature. I can email you copies." A minute later, my inbox dinged. I stared at the screen. My name, my signature, on documents I had never seen in my life. The sound of tires on gravel pulled me from my shock. I turned the window. Karen Wilson sat in her black SUV, parked at the edge of my driveway. She was on her phone, looking directly at my house. When she saw me watching, she smiled and waved. I wasn't just dealing with an overreaching HOA. This was organized fraud. I called my lawyer, Sam Grayson. After examining the documents, his face turned grim. "This is the dirtiest land grab I've seen in 30 years. How did they fake my signature?" I asked, They didn't need to, Sam said. They found an old clause buried deep in county records. Your grandfather supposedly sold development rights decades ago, and they're just exercising them now. That's a lie, I spat. Sam nodded. But proving that will take time. And developers don't wait. I had less than a month before bulldozers arrived. That night, I crashed the HOA meeting. The moment I walked in, the room fell silent. Karen sat ahead of the table, surrounded by her lackeys. Mr. Jackson, this is a private meeting. Private? Like your private sale of my land? The treasurer adjusted his glasses nervously. We have no idea what you're talking about. I slammed the forged documents onto the table. Surveyor's notes. County records. My stolen farm. Karen leaned back, smiling. Perhaps you should check your family records more carefully. This land has always been within our planned development zone. I clenched my fists. You're a liar. A few HOA members looked genuinely confused. Karen had kept them in the dark, too. The meeting erupted into shouting. I had proof, but I needed leverage, because Karen wasn't scared. Yet, I spent all night digging through my family's old records. Then, at 3 a.m., I found it. An old, yellow document from 1943. My grandfather's original water rights agreement. And in the fine print, I saw the one thing that Karen and her HOA had completely overlooked. Our farm controlled the entire water supply for Oak Ridge Estates. At dawn, I called Sam. They stole my land, I said, but they forgot something important. What's that? Who controls their water? At dawn, I stood by my well, the old pump creaking as it pulled water from the earth. The same well my grandfather had dug nearly a century ago. The same well that, thanks to an old but legally binding agreement, controlled the entire water supply for Oak Ridge Estates. I held the fated 1943 water rights contract in my hands. In perpetuity, the primary water allocation shall be designated for agricultural use, superseding residential or commercial needs. I grinned. The HOA might have stolen my land, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They forgot who controlled their faucets. I spent the next day consulting with Sarah, an old college friend who was now a water rights attorney. After reviewing the documents, she whistled. They're screwed. You can legally restrict their access. By noon, I filed an official water reallocation request with the County Water Authority. I didn't do anything illegal. I simply exercised my legal right to prioritize water flow to my remaining 300 acres. The paperwork was processed by the end of the day. By morning, Oak Ridge Estates had no water. It started with a few angry phone calls. By lunchtime, Karen had called me 17 times. By evening, my phone was blowing up with messages from angry HOA residents who had no idea what was happening. Then, at exactly 7:42 p.m., Karen herself showed up at my front gate. She was disheveled, her perfect blonde hair frizzed from the stress, her designer suit wrinkled. What did you do? She shrieked. I took a long, slow sip of my lemonade. Nothing illegal, I said, smirking. I simply redirected my water. People have children, elderly parents. We can't live without water. I raised an eyebrow. People need food, too. But you didn't seem too concerned when you tried to bulldoze my farmland. Karen's voice dropped to sickeningly sweet. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Perhaps we could negotiate. I leaned against my fence. The time for talking was before you forged documents and stole my land. Her mask slipped. Her eyes flashed with pure hatred. This isn't over, she hissed. Oh, I know, I said, because I haven't even started yet. The next morning, I got an unexpected visit. 3 police cars. Sheriff Davis, an old high school friend, stepped out first, looking sheepish. We got complaints about water tampering, he said. Karen and the HOA say you're illegally cutting off their supply. I handed him my legal documents. Everything I did is within my rights. Davis looked through the papers, his jaw tightening. Yeah, this is solid. You've got every right to do this. Before he could say anything else, a news van pulled up. Julie Ramirez from Channel 5 stepped out, microphone in hand. Mr. Jackson, Can you comment on the ongoing water crisis at Oak Ridge Estates? I grinned. I'd be happy to. I walked her through the entire story. How the HOA fraudulently stole my land, how they manipulated zoning records, and how they forgot that my family controlled their entire water supply. By the time I finished, Julie's eyes were shining with the thrill of a breaking story. Within hours, my farm was all over the news. Small-town farmer exposes HOA corruption. Oak Ridge Estates cut off from water after fraudulent land grab. By midnight, I got a text from my cousin Tom, who lived in Oak Ridge. Dude, the HOA just called an emergency meeting. They're losing their minds. By the next morning, Oak Ridge Estates was in full-blown revolt. Developers threatened to sue the HOA for misrepresenting the land sale. Residents were furious, demanding answers. Property values were dropping as the scandal spread. Then, at exactly 11:42 p.m., my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Karen Wilson, looking pale and desperate. "Please," she whispered, voice shaking. "Turn the water back on." I leaned against the doorframe. "Sound serious. Maybe you should be angry at the people who created this situation. We can discuss compensation," she blurted. I stared her dead in the eyes. "Compensation isn't enough. I want my land back." Karen's face twisted. "That's impossible. The contracts." "Then I guess," I interrupted, "we have nothing more to discuss." She was silent for a long moment. Then she exhaled sharply. "The developers, they might reconsider if there's a water issue." I paused, then smiled. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., my kitchen table. Bring your lawyers, your developers, and every fake document you used to steal my land." She hesitated, then nodded as she hurried back to her car. I glanced up at the darkened houses of Oak Ridge Estates. No one was sleeping tonight, because for the first time, they were all asking the same question: where does our water come from? The next morning, my kitchen table became the battleground. Karen sat across from me, flanked by two lawyers. The developer CEO sat beside them, looking seriously pissed. "We were lied to," the CEO snapped. "We never would have touched this land if we knew it wasn't legally available." I leaned back. "Well, now you know." The room was dead silent. Finally, the CEO sighed. "We can't move forward with this project." He turned to Karen. "And we will be filing suit against Oak Ridge HOA." Karen's face went ghost white. The CEO turned back to me. "If we void the sale, would you consider keeping a small portion for a farming facility instead?" I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of facility?" "Jobs for locals. A farmer's market. A community education center for kids to learn about agriculture." I considered it. This could actually help the community, while making sure Oak Ridge never tried something like this again. I nodded. Karen looked like she might faint. They thought they won. They stole 1,700 acres of my family's farmland, the land we'd till for generations. But they forgot one thing. I owned their entire water supply. When I shut off the taps, the HOA collapsed, the developers backed out, and now they were at my kitchen table, desperately trying to negotiate their way out. And let's just say, I wasn't feeling generous. The courtroom was packed. On one side, Karen Wilson, the HOA president, and her smug little board members. On the other, me, my lawyer, and a town full of people who wanted justice. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Martinez entered, shuffling through the stacks of evidence my team had gathered. Then came the best part. My lawyer, Ms. Rodriguez, slammed a massive folder onto the table. "Your Honor," she said, her voice sharp as a blade, "we have proof that the HOA forged property documents, misrepresented zoning laws, and fraudulently transferred land they had no right to sell." The judge frowned. "Do you have evidence?" Rodriguez nodded. "We've also subpoenaed their bank records. Multiple board members received large deposits. Immediately following the fraudulent land sale, the courtroom exploded. Karen's smug face melted. Her treasurer, Richard, started sweating bullets. Judge Martinez banged the gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" Then he turned to Karen. "Mrs. Wilson, do you have an explanation for these transactions?" Karen's lips tightened. I need a moment to consult with my attorney. Rodriguez smiled. I bet you do. The judge leaned forward. Here's my ruling. I am nullifying the fraudulent land sale immediately. The 1,700 acres will be returned to its rightful owner. The room erupted in cheers. Karen? She just sat there, silent, defeated, and drowning in regret. But it wasn't over. Not for her. Within hours, the scandal was everywhere. Local news, Facebook groups, even national media outlets picked up the story. Corrupt HOA steals family farm and gets what they deserve. Karen tried hiding, but that didn't work when reporters camped outside her house. Even worse, the developer CEO, the one she had lied to, sued the HOA for misrepresentation. And then the criminal charges hit. Turns out forgery and real estate fraud? Not exactly a slap on the wrist offense. Richard, the treasurer? He flipped on Karen faster than a pancake at a Sunday brunch. He went on live TV, crying into the microphone. I didn't know it was illegal. Karen told us it was fine. Meanwhile, the HOA board, half of them resigned in disgrace. Karen's own husband filed for divorce. She was broke, jobless, and completely humiliated. And me? I had my land back. But I wasn't done yet. After winning the court case, I had a choice to make. I could spend years fighting with the remaining HOA members, or I could turn this whole thing into something positive. So I made a deal. The developer, who had been duped by the HOA, came to me with a new idea. What if, he said, instead of a shopping mall, we built something that helped the community? I raised an eyebrow. Go on. He slid a proposal across the table. A modern farming co-op that would create jobs for local farmers. A farmer's market, so people could buy fresh, local food instead of overpriced grocery store junk. An agricultural learning center for kids, so they can understand where their food actually comes from. And most importantly, the HOA would never have control over it. I thought about it. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about legacy. So I shook his hand. 6 months later, I stood in my eastern field, watching tractors work the land that had almost been stolen. But instead of bulldozers, we were expanding our farm. Instead of shopping centers, we were growing crops that would feed the county. And instead of fancy mansions, we had a thriving farmer's market. Even better, some of the Oak Ridge residents, the ones who had been forced to stay silent by the HOA, became customers. Some even signed up to work on the farm part-time. One older gentleman, a retired teacher, shook my hand. My grandfather was a farmer, he said, tears in his eyes. I hated what they tried to do to you. I'm glad you fought back. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a victory for me. This was a victory for the entire community. As fall turned to winter, something beautiful happened. The division between Oak Ridge and the farming community began to heal. We set up a weekly crop share program where residents could buy produce directly from a farm. We even rewrote the HOA bylaws, permanently protecting farmland from future development. And Karen? She had to sell her big fancy house to pay her legal fees. One day, I saw her driving past the farm. She glared at me from behind the wheel of her beat-up Honda Civic, a far cry from her luxury SUV. I just smiled, because while she had lost everything, we had gained something even better. I learned something important from this whole ordeal. Some people think that power comes from money, something that comes from owning fancy houses or controlling HOA meetings. But real power, it comes from knowing your rights. It comes from standing your ground. And most of all, it comes from knowing where the water flows. Because no matter how much money someone has, they still have to turn on the faucet.